12:32. Let's get started with 2 minutes delay, which is already painful, but you will get your 2 minutes afterwards. So it will still be a 75 minutes event, which will end at 1:47. Good afternoon. Welcome to this event, which is brought to you by an entente. You remember this word, entente? By the Kroc Institute for Peace Studies, the Keough-Naughton Institute for Irish Studies, and to a much lesser extent, the Nanovic Institute for European Studies. We are grateful for the collaboration that illustrates the point that there can be 3 units, but one shared commitment to bring people and ideas and people with their ideas together, which is somewhere else called the Trinity. My name is Clemens Sedmak, and I serve as director of the Nanovic Institute, and today as moderator of this wonderful panel. Our star this afternoon is Liridona Veliu Ashiku. She has authored a book that brought us together. The book is called Balkanization and the Euro-Atlantic Processes of the Western Balkans, Back to the Future. The book explores how the discourse of Balkanization has shaped EU and NATO policies towards the region. Balkanization, so a definition goes, is the breakup of a larger country into smaller independent states, bless you, which are often hostile to each other, or alternatively, the process involving the fragmentation of an area, country, or region into multiple smaller and hostile units. Smaller is not always better. The author behind this remarkable book is with us today. Liridona is the fall 2024 visiting scholar at the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies. She's also a faculty member in the Department of Political Science at Loyola University in Chicago and holds a PhD in politics and international relations from Dublin City University. She specializes in Balkanization, democratic transitions in post-socialist societies, and social spatial segregation, and is fluent in Albanian, Macedonian, Serbian, and English. We are particularly hopeful for the latter today. Thank you, Liridona, and welcome. Welcome, Liridona, right? Welcome, Liridona. Our international guest from Ireland is Dr. Gesim Visok. I'm mutilating your name, but it's Gesim, right? We can debate whether a colleague from Ireland coming to Notre Dame is really international and not actually domestic. A peaceful Irish man coming to the fightish Irish is still coming home. In any case, Gesim is the Associate Dean for Research and Associate Professor of Peace and Conflict Studies, School of Law and Government at the Dublin City University. He's a scholar on statehood and state recognition and post-conflict peace building and state building. His research focuses on the making, remaking, and unmaking of states and peace processes in contemporary world politics. Among his published works are the De-Recognition of States, the Oxford Handbook of Peace Building, State Building, and Peace Formation, and the Palgrave Encyclopedia of Peace and Conflict Studies. Gesim is also the founding editor of the Routledge Studies in Statehood and co-editor of Rethinking Peace and Conflict Studies with Palgrave. In addition to his academic activity, I should say activities, Gesim has over 20 years of experience working with civil society groups and policy consultancy in post-conflict societies. One of his main research interests is transitional justice, civil society in the Western Balkans, and Notre Dame. Dear Gesim, we are honored to have you here. Welcome. We are also joined by Carly Steelman, who is a PhD candidate in the Peace Studies and Sociology program right here at Our Lady's University. Carly graduated from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock in 2013 with a BA in Political Science. She received an MA in Political Science from the University of New Mexico in 2015. Her master's thesis examined how individual levels of social capital impact economic development outcomes in post-conflict Bosnia-Herzegovina. Her dissertation focuses on collective memory of violence using GIS. She analyzes the spatial distribution of violence and collective memory in 2 cases, Northern Ireland and Bosnia-Herzegovina. Carly represents the brilliant young minds that make up Notre Dame's PhD candidates community. Dear Carly, thank you so much for being with us and welcome. For the little time that is left, this is the choreography. Liridona will go first, and she will have 15 minutes and 25 seconds of grace to introduce her book. Gesim will follow, and since he has traveled so far, you will have up to 20 minutes and 10 seconds of grace to share your thoughts. That's who I am. Finally, preparing us for a discussion, we'll have Kali offer a 15 minutes input. After that, we will have some time for questions from the audience, which is you. So please, while you listen to the inputs, prepare yourselves mentally for brief, brilliant, and benign questions. Many thanks, Liridona. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm going to get to that floor.
There we go.
Thank you. This should be working, yeah? All right, so thank you, Clemens, Gazim, Carly, and all of you for being here today. This event is not just about the Balkans' place in the heart of Europe, but also about topics close to my heart. My book, Balkanization and the Euro-Atlantic Processes of the Western Balkans, Back to the Future, has been both an academic project and a deeply personal journey, shaped not only by my research, but my experience growing up in the region. Therefore, I'm especially grateful to the Kroc, Nanovic, and to the Keough-Naughton Institute for their support in making today possible. Here's a quick overview, right, of today's presentation. I'll start by unpacking the main argument of my book. We'll then examine concepts such as identity and Balkanization and their impact. We'll shift to discussing Western policies towards the Balkans. We'll continue with highlighting key methods, materials, and efforts to uncover recurring narratives and elevate marginalized voices. We'll look at pivotal moments in North Macedonia and Serbia, which I've analyzed in the book to trace how the discourse of Balkanization evolves. And we'll then return to the core argument in the light of the groundwork that we've laid. And I'll close by reflecting on the book's personal and global relevance. So let's begin with the main argument. The central question of the book is, how does Balkanization shape Euro-Atlantic policies toward the Western Balkans and vice versa? That is, how do these processes then reflect back to shape identity? So there's a constitutive link there. The central argument is, Balkanization is not a historic fact. It's a discourse that serves both Western political interests and the interests of local political elites. The Balkans, being framed as Balkanized, shapes the policies imposed on them, and these policies in turn then shape the region's identity as Balkanized. This process then creates a continuous feedback loop between identity and policy. Importantly, Balkan political elites also participate in the discourse, reproducing these narratives for their own gain, whether to secure legitimacy, attract Western support, or deflect local criticism. In this way, both local and Western actors perpetuate the region's liminality, always framed as almost there but not quite. Throughout this talk, I'll explore how these dynamics play out through the Balkans' identity, Euro-Atlantic policies, the materials I engaged with, and key case studies. At the end, I'll once again return to the argument, summarizing how these elements all connect and what we might do to break this cycle. But before, let's take a step back and set the stage. I want you all to please scan the QR code and write in the form the first word that comes to your mind when you think of Balkanization. I'm a little bit blind, so I'll just culture, identity reinforcement, war, ethnic conflict, divide, chaos, Sarajevo, division, collapse of Yugoslavia, corruption. Yes, there. There's a Lithuania there, yeah, okay. Fragmentation, segmentation, yeah. So all of that, very interesting. I think first it highlights how these narratives need to be unpacked, but also how if we aim to engage meaningfully with the region and especially its people, then we have to do a lot of critical work because eventually that's whom we're evoking when we use the term Balkanization. So it's not just about the region, it's also about its people. So I'll start with a brief history of the term. It originated in 1918, describing the potential fragmentation of Europe amid Germany's post-World War I collapse. In a New York Times article, an industrialist warned that Germany's fall could splinter Europe. Interestingly, I think this shows already how early on Balkanization was not used solely for the Balkans, but to reflect the West's own anxieties about instability and decline. Over time, the term then evolved into a discourse, a lens not just for viewing the Balkans, but for any situation where fragmentation disrupts political or ideological projects. Today, Balkanization extends beyond geography, used to describe anything from financial collapse to desegregated art, splintered internet, even burgers, among many, many other scenarios. The power of this discourse then lies in its repetition, reinforcing instability. It frames the Balkans as a region defined by chaos, only relevant when confirming stereotypes or during moments of conflict. Once the violence subsides, so does the interest. And with it, the region's post-conflict realities are largely ignored, but for more on that later. Now, from identity, let's turn to the other side of the coin, policy and the current state of Euro-Atlantic integration in the Western Balkans. These processes, EU and NATO memberships, are framed as tools for peace and progress. Yet, as I argue, they also perpetuate stereotypes about the Balkans. Here's a quick overview of where things at the moment stand with the Western Balkan countries. But what really matters and what we can see from the table and what the book suggests is that the integration into the EU and NATO and the different stages that you see here are not merely about meeting benchmarks. Progress is often delayed by perceived identity shortcomings of the Balkans. The point here is that the Euro-Atlantic integration is as much about identity negotiation as it is about policy. Even seemingly neutral processes like visa liberalization or stabilization frameworks are shaped by historic assumptions about the region. So when countries fail to meet benchmarks, it's framed not just as a policy setback, but as a confirmation of Balkan instability. This reinforces the idea that the Balkans are always at risk of slipping back into fragmentation, Balkanizing, requiring constant Western supervision and, of course, Western unity. And this is what makes the discourse of Balkanization so powerful and so limiting. It frames the region as one in need of Western intervention, but keeps it in a state of permanent transition. This then leads to my next section, where I'll briefly skim through the materials, methods, and some key historical moments that I explore in the book to show how these narratives unfold. One of the most crucial aspects of the research is the variety of my materials that I engaged with. I went beyond official policy documents to include speeches, media reports, novels, and local texts. Here are the two tables, or what I call research material matrices, that summarize the research material intertextually. Here's the one on North Macedonia, and here's also the one on Serbia. And of course, the goal is not to get into detailed discussions on intertextuality and how general texts differ from key texts or how historical texts differ from contemporary ones. Rather, I want to highlight two key points. First, intertextuality is used to connect the historical with the contemporary, demonstrating how narratives persist and evolve over time, shaping present realities. And second, I want to highlight the diversity of texts, which wasn't just a methodological decision, it was a deliberate choice to bring marginalized voices to the forefront. When we rely solely on official narratives, we risk reproducing the very dynamics that the book aims to challenge. I also want to mention that one of the biggest challenges in gathering material was the lack of accessible archives in the Balkans. To give you an example, I found that the Library of Congress in DC had microfilms of Macedonian newspapers that were no longer available in North Macedonia. And I think this speaks volumes about how even knowledge production is shaped by geopolitical dynamics. So who preserves whose stories and who has access to them? This suggests that the region faces both internal, of course, but also external challenges in controlling its own narrative and knowledge production. It also reinforces how the concept of Balkanization is not just a political process, but an epistemological one, where knowledge about the region is fractured, dispersed, marginalized, or Balkanized, if you will. My goal in using this text is to bring these marginalized voices into the center of the narrative. It's a way of saying the story of the Balkans needs to be told by and for the Balkans, even if we have to reconstruct that narrative from fragments held elsewhere. Now, these texts are analyzed through a genealogical method, meaning that I trace the discourse of Balkanization through key historical moments. I identify three basic genealogical discourses, that is the Balkan Wars, World War I, World War II, colonial, and Balkanism. Here's where you can see in the table above the genealogical discourses, but this genealogical approach is what allows me to show how the same identity dynamics reappear in different forms throughout history, including today. And this is where I connect these three basic genealogical discourses to three contemporary ones: the Yugoslav crisis, stabilization, and Europeanization. The way these basic discourses are identified is, among others, through focusing the analysis on some key events in North Macedonia and Serbia. The figure here lists the key events analyzed in the book. I won't go through these, but I want to make, again, two quick notes: why these events and why these cases. North Macedonia and Serbia exemplify contrasting responses to Yugoslavia's dissolution. North Macedonia as an oasis of peace, and Serbia resisting the breakup, offering distinct but linked cases of Balkanization. Whereas the selected events then mark pivotal moments of political intensity in their Euro-Atlantic paths, revealing how intra-regional dynamics shape EU and NATO policies. Now let's return to the main argument. Through these cases and events, we see that Balkanization is not a relic, but an active discourse. It intersects identity, Balkan and Western, with Euro-Atlantic policies, perpetuating narratives of fragmentation and otherness. These narratives enable Western actors to project unity when convenient, while regional elites exploit them for legitimacy and external support. That is, the Euro-Atlantic policies shape both the Balkan other and, importantly, the Western South, often reflecting Western insecurities more than regional realities. The Balkans are framed as perpetually unfinished, teetering on ancient ethnic hatreds, reinforcing the West-South image as stable and unified. Importantly, the discourse isn't merely imposed, so region's elites recycle it for political gain, keeping the region in a state of liminality. In essence, Balkanization is not just about the Balkans, even though that's what it might initially convey. It's a reflection, a mirror of the West's shifting anxieties, evolving identities, and fragile sense of self. Now, the big question is, why should the West care about overcoming the other when it has seemingly benefited from this division? That's a fair question, and it forces us to confront a difficult truth. Framing the Balkans as the other has historically served Western interests. It allowed the West to project unity by casting itself as stable and enlightened, in contrast to the chaotic and unstable Balkans. But while this strategy brought short-term gains, it carries risks in today's shifting geopolitical landscape. First, continued reliance on otherness undermines trust in the EU and NATO. Delayed progress and conditional promises foster disillusionment, creating space for Russia, China, Turkey, and others who offer partnership without imposing Western-style conditions and without the moralizing narrative of becoming European. Second, the Balkans are now a battleground for influence. Russia taps into Slavic Orthodox ties, China builds infrastructure through the Belt and Road Initiative, and Turkey draws on historical connections. Without deeper Western engagement, the region may align with these powers, weakening Europe's stability. Maintaining the Balkans as an other poses dangers for the West. It reinforces a narrative that Europe is defined by exclusion, weakening the EU's ability to present a cohesive identity in an increasingly contested multipolar order. Third, the West frames the Balkans as unstable to mask its own internal issues, like rising populism, inequality, and political fragmentation. This strategy deflects attention from Western challenges, but risks backfiring as the same issues increasingly destabilize Western democracies. The more the West relies on the Balkans as a scapegoat, the harder it becomes to address its own problems, creating vulnerabilities that both weaken unity and invite external powers to exploit. Therefore, moving beyond othering is not just a moral choice, it's a strategic necessity. Treating the Balkans as a partner, not a problem, strengthens both the region and the West. Failure to do so risks giving influence away to geopolitical rivals and undermining the West's strategic coherence. In today's contested world, unity and credibility cannot be built through exclusion. Peace must be co-created through continuous, meaningful collaboration, not just in moments of crisis. Now, why does this book matter? And here I must very selfishly say that this book matters to me. As someone from the region, I've seen how the Balkans are labeled, dismissed, or valued only when they entertain or when they alarm. It also matters to those I grew up with, friends, family, and peers who have struggled to navigate the complexities of what it means to come from the Balkans. But beyond this, and I think you'll be the best judge of this, the book's originality lies in how it links fragmented identities with EU and NATO integration efforts and how the latter can perpetuate the former. Paradoxically, it unpacks the paradox of Balkanization as not just a stigma, but also a tool for Western unity. And it highlights agency among Balkan leaders who strategically play into these narratives. But also, this is not just about the Balkans. It's a story about how global powers, through lenses of otherness, construct their own identities. It's about who gets to define knowledge and whose stories are told. Similar dynamics of self and other could operate in regions like Middle East, the post-Soviet space, or sub-Saharan Africa. The cycle is predictable. Attention peaks during crisis, but fades as violence subsides. In the post-conflict phase, these regions are often overlooked by Western policymakers, slipping into irrelevance until the next crisis erupts. This is where I think this book goes beyond the themes of my book. If we continue to engage with the region only during crisis, or only as a region in crisis, where there is violence to document or peace to enforce, we will never break the cycle. Instead, I think we need sustained academic and political engagement that questions its own assumptions. This means confronting how the focus on ancient ethnic hatreds serves our interests, even if it risks ending some political or academic careers, or better, transforming them toward more reflective and accountable knowledge production. Now, I want to bring this back home and connect it to Notre Dame's this year forum series. What do we owe each other? But perhaps I think the deeper question is, who is the other? And what does that reveal about ourselves? Only by confronting this can we truly answer what we owe one another. However, it's clear by now, episodic attention and shallow engagement won't get us there. I'm currently working on how intersectionality can perhaps get us there, but this is another project beyond the book, which I won't talk about now, but which I think can help us dismantle the comfortable assumptions and easy narratives that we rely on. For a start, I think we owe each other curiosity instead of stereotypes. We owe each other sustained engagement, not just in moments of crisis. We owe each other humility to challenge our own assumptions and the courage to imagine a future beyond fragmentation. When the Balkans or any region are viewed only through the lens of ancient ethnic hatred and Balkanization, it suggests that they have no value unless in visible conflict. If there is no ethnic cleansing to shock or civil war to document, the region is dismissed as irrelevant. This reinforces the same cycle. The Balkans matter only when they bleed. If it bleeds, it leads. And so I think we owe it to each other to break this pattern reflexively and responsibly, to be able to imagine each other and remain engaged, not just during conflict, not just post-conflict, but dare I say, and this might be hard to imagine, during peace too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Liridona, for your 18 minutes input. That leaves you with 17 minutes, Gizim.
That's okay. Right. Professor Sedmak, Dr. Veliu, and Steelman, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me and making this visit possible. DCU, where I'm based, has already established partnership with Notre Dame University, and I'm glad that now Liridona is a new link between our two universities. As you know, Liridona completed her doctoral studies in DCU, and I happen to be the co-supervisor. So in my brief intervention today, I'd like to focus on two segments. First, say a few words about Liridona's book and its contribution. Liridona did brilliant work in packing a really 5 years of research and brilliant sort of reflection of the book. I'll sort of use different words and sort of unpack what I think are the main contribution of the book. And second, provide my own reflection of the region and international intervention in the Balkans through the lenses of some of the themes that Liridona has covered. So today we're celebrating Liridona's second book, and it's a brilliant book, and I had the pleasure to supervise while she was in DCU. Liridona is a prolific researcher, and no one else is able to go so deep and detailed in the topic that Liridona does, and I've witnessed that in this project and also 2 other projects that she has helped me with. So certainly whatever arguments are in the book are a reflection of a long-term, refined, well-thought, well-researched observations. They stand. So that's important to highlight. So Liridona's book, I think, makes 3 major contributions. First one is that no one else so far that I'm aware and that we're aware has engaged so thoroughly with the discourse of Balkanization that Liridona has. Okay, so it's a great historical book in that sense, a resource for anyone who wants to understand the region, understand this term, understand how it has evolved over time. Again, Balkanization has faded away at the moment, but we heard it coming back during the Brexit time. In Ethiopia, the Tigray region, it was brought back. So, Ukraine. So it's something that is symptomatic of something bigger. And I think Balkanization is not only about the Balkans, it's about the collapse of empires and the struggle of alliances to come together and survive. And that's really an important segment. It's a symptom, it's a condition of how difficult it is to build alliances and keep them. It's about the way how the world operates through unmaking, through unbecoming, through fragmentation. So in a way, Balkanization is the condition of the world, not the other way around. So in a way, we have to sort of see maybe the bright side of Balkanization, not as a stereotypical framework, but something that we have to normalize it because it is how the way how the world works. So it is through disorder, through fragmentation, through unbecoming, through this fragmentation that we evolve. It's not the other way around that we wish to be. Linearity, progressive thoughts, they're all sort of kind of conceptual myths. That's why we're getting these shocks in the world all the time because we're not preparing ourselves to understand how the way the world works. So that's the first major contribution, is sort of really providing this archival research on Balkanization like no one else. Second contribution of the book is to try to bring together these 2 themes, Balkanization and Euro-Atlantic integration. So it's this really important theme that brings how an empire collapsed, Ottoman Empire, Habsburg Empire, Balkans, Yugoslavia were created, and then it collapsed, and then how we're now trying to reunite Europe through EU and NATO, and how that sort of resemblances of the past are haunting the region and the new structure. So it tells us a lot about alliance making and breaking. And that's a really important point to make. So the book shows how the process of EU integration and expansion, as well as NATO one, was not all about just technical criteria, membership, sort of procedures, bureaucracy, but it was also about trying to resolve the legacies of the past empires. So alliance making happens to be on building on other sort of failed projects. And Balkanization is that sort of legacy of those leftovers from the past, trying to fix and build something else new. And Liridona's book really captures those sort of historical legacies with really kind of contemporary policy situations. And it's also, the book captures how conditionality, civilizational changes, cultural processes happen. We're talking about deep social engineering happening through Euro-Atlantic integration. So remember this word, social engineering. This is an important one. Balkanization was the first stage to remind the Balkans that they have to give up on their past identity, which was perceived as fragmental, divisive, hateful, bad, and then cherish a new European self. And that sort of transformation is fundamental. Sort of China has the process of harmonization as their form of social engineering. EU has Europeanization. European model is more soft, friendly, sort of peaceful, but nonetheless, it has the same effect. Deep social, political, cultural, civilizational transformation. So the book really kind of connects and shows how Balkans were caught in the process of unmaking their past, the Balkanized self, and remaking themselves as European subjects. And that is really difficult. And that's why now we are seeing that the region is caught in between. It's neither European, how the EU and NATO wants, nor the old one that they were partially Ottomanized or sort of, other sort of European orientalized leftover processes. So Liridona's book really captures that complexity of how the past and present, how the process of de-Balkanization happens in practice. Alliance making builds on that de-Balkanization, but then how we are actually trapped in a new cycle of Balkanization. So, and that's the third point of the book. It is how EU and NATO constituted themselves, and they became who they are as a result, partially thanks to the Balkans crisis. So we know that European foreign policy, common foreign and security policy, was built as a result of Yugoslav wars. If it wasn't for Yugoslav wars, we wouldn't have a unified European security and political structure, at least in that format that happened during the 90s. Same as with NATO. Balkans intervention in Bosnia and Kosovo were the two turning points where NATO shifted from a sort of defensive alliance to a crisis management, peacekeeping global organization. So, thanks to the Balkans and the Balkanized region, these two organizations, EU and NATO, reinvented themselves for the 21st century. So they've benefited a lot at the expense of the region. And the book kind of shows those dynamics of how alliances need othering in order to consolidate themselves as a unified subject. And certainly, it's not all negative, because EU and NATO involvement in the Balkans have been transformational. So we have to acknowledge that. But it is a painful process that has sort of costed a lot in terms of ontological security, self-esteem, and perception of the region, which are, crucial in terms of societal security or how the region sees themselves. So, but then there's something really interesting happening. What the book shows is that in the process of EU and NATO enlargement in the Balkans, Balkanization has also mutated within EU and NATO themselves. So enlargement policy has really shown how messy EU is. They have not been able to have a unified position on how to deal with the region. Fighting between Germany and France, Eastern Bloc and Western Bloc, veto powers, they've all come back in the process of trying to bring the Balkans back in. So in a way, Balkanization has shown that actually EU has a Balkanization problem themselves. There's a fragmentation deep inside. And this fragmentation not only that has shown or revealed cracks within EU. I mean, look at now Orban in Hungary and few other member states, but also it has looped back and made the Balkanized Balkan again Balkanized. So the very process of trying to force these countries in the Balkans make peace, resolve their historical legacy, so de-Balkanize, has forced them to enter a new cycle of violence, conflict and disagreement. And that has really kind of reinvented historical conflicts and brought them back to a new fora. So this process of othering and trying to transform them into us has really kind of led to unwanted or unintended consequences. Let me maybe conclude then by, so these are the three major contributions of the book. So if you haven't bought the book or read or ordered, please do so, because it's more than just an area studies book. It goes deeper into the making, unmaking of alliances and how difficult it is to survive in these conditions. And the final point I'd like to make is is there a way to overcome Balkanization? And Liridona made some really interesting points in the end. So one could argue and say, well, EU and NATO should fast track the membership of these countries into these two alliances, because that's the only way to overcome Balkanization. Avoid this politics of delay, containment, bring them in and give them equal chance. And that way they feel like Eastern European countries are part of these alliances. And we've seen the transformational effect on Baltic countries, on some of the Eastern members. So that's kind of an easy solution. But we have seen that it is very difficult, and EU is struggling now. And thanks to the crisis in Ukraine, the attention has come back to the Balkans. So we had to other Russia and Eastern Bloc to normalize the Balkans. So the shift now is from Balkanized bad other, now we've moved to Russia. And that has actually made Balkans look good. I mean, so it is only through othering and expanding the othering that Balkans might escape this othering. So basically, Balkans have benefited a lot, in my view, from the crisis in Ukraine, because suddenly the EU has woken up to a geopolitical reality to speed up the process of integration. If it's left to the bureaucracy and sort of processes of criteria meeting, all of that, it will never happen. We've seen that for the last 30 years. So EU, NATO only operates through crisis, through emergencies, and through new threats. So since there are new threats, Balkans is appearing as constructive. And yesterday there was a new survey, and it showed that actually there's increasing support for membership of Western Balkans. Around 40% of EU citizens believe that we have to admit these groups. Same as for Ukraine as well, less for Turkey. And so I think in terms of overcoming otherness is by passing on, so the dirt never disappears, it just passes on to another entity. So, and that's the sort of dark side of how alliances are made. They cannot escape the process of othering. Otherwise, if we go to that idea of what you were alluding, we have to go back to post 1945 international order, where everyone is independent sovereign state, everyone is equal regardless of their size, origin, and identity. And I don't think we're going in that direction. We're going through these sort of regional complex systems. And these systems operate only through othering, through kind of justifying why they're unified at the expense of the other. So yeah, so I'll leave it here, and I'm happy to take any question or respond to other things.
Thank you, Kesim. Thank you. Ali, please.
Hi.
Use the mic. Thank you.
Never used a mic before.
Like
So I was asked to be part of this panel for a couple of reasons. I think I want to start out by talking a little bit about the book and what I see as some of its major contributions, and then move into questions about how we can maintain engagement with places that are not in active violent conflict, because that's what's necessary for actual peace. So I'm at the Kroc Institute, and we talk a lot about sustainable peace, and like true visions of robust peace have to go beyond just the cessation of direct violence and hostility, right? It involves state building, it involves true conflict resolution between previously warring parties. So I want to start with one of the things that I think is most unique about this book. It's a very robust and thick description of identity construction and the implications of identity construction for international relations. So in that way, I see it as kind of in the constructivist paradigm, but it's very often not well done, right? Those descriptions of how identity is constructed and how it's mutually constructive are often very, very thin. And what this is an incredibly thick description of how identities are built and why they matter for foreign policy. And I think that is partially a reflection of just your own identity, right? And I think what's really cool about this is that often, very often, works like this can feel, especially works about the Balkans, can feel very, very extractive. I have done fieldwork multiple times, and it often feels like researchers parachute in, play in the lives of people to get their experiences, come back and exploit them. And this very much is not that. It doesn't have that feel, and it has implications for peace and development in the region, and actually a way forward that I think is far more hopeful in these more extractive methods and this more extractive like kind of scholarship. Another thing that I think it does really, really well is, first of all, just a comment really quickly on the case selection and like the brilliance of the case selection because of its polarity, right? And the two versions of the way that Balkanization developed. But the way that you take us through the incentives that these organizations have to perpetuate these identities, right? So it's not just a story about, oh, here we have contrasting versions of identity. We have contrasting versions of identity because they serve people's interests, right? They serve the interests of NATO as an organization, and they also serve the interests, I think you did a great job of arguing, of elites, right? And there's so much need to point out the incentive structure for maintaining this otherness because it is still perpetuated, right? And it's perpetuated at multiple levels. Elites use the Balkanization and the internalization of the narrative of Balkanization to sort of encourage this perception that the region can't overcome its divides, right? So I wrote down one of the things that someone wrote when they inputted the QR code as corrupt, right? And I found that like strikingly accurate because it reflects so much of what I hear from people when I do work in these places. But it's sort of it's settled into this inevitability of corruption identity, right? So that when voters see corruption and systematic party skimming off of the top, there's this inevitability to it that I think leads to widespread apathy and a lack of motivational belief that the Balkanization and the negative stereotypes of Balkanization can be overcome in the first place. So when we talk about that, it also, so there's the apathetic version of that, and then there's the violent version of that, right? And the persistence of Balkanization, the persistence of this fractured identity always has this flavor that it could spark at any time, right? It could go from being an inactive conflict to an active one at any time if a charismatic elite has enough charisma to spark violence, right? And so it's this double-edged thing where it simultaneously encourages apathy and it encourages continued conflict. And so this risk that we'll start paying attention to it because there will be a new war at any time. And we see these divisions literally replicated in stone and space. So what I study in the region is memorialization and collective memory. And one of the reasons that I study that is because it's a convenient vehicle for analyzing exactly this, right? You get to see how divisions are literally replicated and reproduced in material ways that are enduring, which you can imagine when your landscape reflects fractured identity, your narratives reflect fractured identity, and your language and your relationships. And so when we think about Balkanization and othering, like, yeah, you you happen to be analyzing two cases, but I completely agree that it goes beyond the region. I mean, if there are hamburgers,
Balkanized.
Balkanized hamburgers. And your larger point, I think, to both of your comments about the need to pay attention to these cases in times where there's not just direct violence, I think is equally as applicable to other cases, right? It's a generalizable argument about how when these narratives are allowed to develop and persist in institutions, and they seep into the language of the bureaucrats and organizers in these places that perpetuate them, conflict inevitably stagnates, right? And it becomes very difficult to intervene. So at the point of challenging language and looking at discourse and examining assumptions, I think this work does a very good job of indicating why that's important.
Thank you, Karen. Much better. Before we open the floor, let's give Liridona a chance to respond to what you have heard in your own words.
I'll be very brief. I really want to leave some space for also questions from the audience. And I just want to really thank both Gazim and Carly for what I think were really comments that demonstrate your engagement with the book. So I appreciate that. For Gazim, it was kind of inevitable as a supervisor to engage, but I think also very gracious. And for Carly, of course, thanks for joining. I think all of these points of contributions for me are very important to hear. There was an intention there to, of course, make this something that goes beyond the Balkans. This aspect of othering, I think, has defined and continues to define international relations. And it's food for thought when it comes to other regions that are currently in trouble. And so this is really an opportunity for us to reflect more on that. I'm a little bit more optimistic than Gazim when it comes to the possibility of overcoming otherness. The way that I engage with it is not really forgetting about otherness, but rather engaging with it critically. So I don't think that there's sort of a beginning and an end process to, engaging with the other, defining the other, and then wrapping it up with the other. But I think it's a continuous process of constantly reflecting, engaging with these others reflexively and responsibly, as I suggested. And I don't think that, of course, there's going to be an end to it, but the more that we have certain questions about the other in mind, I think the less we will be able to reproduce such others. And I think that's why, in terms of the forum series, when I was reading the posters around campus that were saying, what do we owe each other? Really, my question constantly was, what other? Who's this other? And how did we come to define them as such? And how did that serve our interests? So that's the part when I'm a little bit more optimistic to sort of, in that way and in that fashion, overcome otherness. And I really appreciate, Carly, your point on this book, hopefully not really demonstrating this example of extractive scholarship. One of the things that I engaged with, thanks to the external examiner's insistence, by the way, was a part in the methodology section in which I explain, along the lines of what you mentioned, constructivist work, how is this work that's post-structuralist methodologically, how is this different from the work of certain scholars who you might be aware of, like Lene Hansen, David Campbell, Derderian, that have written a lot about the Balkans. And the novelty, I think, here is that while I adopt post-structuralist theories and methodologies to study the Balkans and to make an area studies contribution, I think, in spite of the appreciation that I have for the work of this post-structuralist, I feel that the relationship has been the opposite. That is, developing post-structuralist theories and methods somehow on the back of the Western Balkans or any others. And I think more and more now, new generations of the Balkans like me get to travel a little bit more. We get to attend liberal universities in Europe, in the US, and comfortably also we can then engage with this knowledge that's been produced on the Balkans. And we're uniquely positioned maybe to also challenge that a little bit better and then hopefully together construct more inclusive forms of knowledge production. So I'll leave it at that, and then I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Liridona. So the floor is open. I can run around. That's fine. Yes, yes. Sitting on this is very dangerous, kind of this chair. The floor is open. Yes, please.
Thank you very much, all, and especially Liri, my fellow mate. I'm also a visiting research fellow. Our offices are side by side, and I've really enjoyed knowing you and your work. I work on the Middle East, and I've been inspired by your work. I like the reference you make to the ability to reconstruct what you've produced in other regions. But coming from the Middle East, I also know, and this might, please correct me if I'm wrong, be the case in the Balkans, that we can completely approach these regions from an ahistorical perspective.
Absolutely.
And historically, these regions have had fluid identities as well as fluid borders. And as I look at countries that I know, like Iran, like, we're talking now about, I'm here working on Israel and Palestine, I think of the Balkans. And when you look at the reconstruction of identities post the Balkanization era, you still find areas like Serbia leaning toward the east. You find areas leaning to the west, along patterns that predate the nation state formation of the region. How would you factor this reality into your future research? Thank you.
Thank you. Liridona, future research.
Yeah, quickly, yes. So, Banafshe, I just spin this right back at you and say that you're the expert on the Middle East. I think for me, the suggestions on, taking upon the findings and the insights of this book to think about others really did not intend to suggest an ahistoric engagement. And of course, in terms of methodology, in terms of the research material, in terms of the historicity, that's why I also mentioned genealogical approach to studying this kind of discourses. Those all would need to be factored in to fit within the contextual parameters of a study. At the moment, I don't have any intention to engage with the Middle East, partially because I think I don't feel prepared, or I don't feel an expert to actually take this over there. And back to, I think, Carly's point on extractive knowledge, I do think that positionality and reflexivity matter here. And I think that someone who has firsthand experience events in the Middle East or others might be more eligible to engage with them more constructively. Does that make sense? Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It was really interesting to hear the modus of the analysis, which can really apply to other regions across Europe. I come from Georgia, and Georgia was also used to be placed among Caucasian countries as a place where countries would have similarities, but it took us somewhere around 10 years to transform Georgia from former Soviet country with military conflict into a Eastern European emerging democracy with EU aspirations. But of course, that was as a result of some of the robust reforms you mentioned, especially in terms of anti-corruption, Westernization, and public institutions. Of course, the changing of the narrative, it's more theoretical, but how do you think, is there any actual policy results which would support these efforts of changing the narrative? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You go first, and then we ask also Gessim and Kali if they want to comment as well. Please, Liridona, go first.
Yeah.
Then Gessim goes first. That's all right.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So, the question of strategic narratives, I think that this is something that, and also US foreign policy recently have picked up on that. Sort of the only way to overcome stigmatization is to deploy strategic narratives. And there is actually now a field of hardcore security studies that focus on strategic narratives. And certainly for countries such as Georgia, to overcome stigmatization, othering, or shift from a post-Soviet country to a European aspiring member state, it required that sort of investment in changing the story. And but that's a dual process. Sort of internally, you can pursue that process of changing the story through diplomatic means, events on the ground, but it is also how powerful external forces are to force you to change the story. And at the moment, Georgia is not in a good place with the recent events, so they're kind of trapped into that sort of process. But it just speaks of the othering that goes at the moment, sort of how EU is not accepting the election results and they consider them as fraud, and they're forging, maybe for good reason, that sort of recounting of elections, sort of pushing the narrative. So that's sort of, this is a new era of strategic narratives in the geopolitical world, where EU is actually learning how to weaponize. And sort of, it used to be very much neutral how the countries dealt with their internal issues. Now they've realized that no, they have to step in and take a side. So that's a really interesting way of how they've learned from Balkans that they can't let this sort of Balkanization or de-Balkanization processes happening, but they have to take the lead on that.
Good. You want to add something? Please use the mic.
Just something very briefly. I think the policy implications part of it, and this is a fair point to also make, that it is a scholarly intellectual product with possible policy implications. But I just like to quickly draw the attention to the foreword to answer, because this is a recurring question. Why would the political elites care, or how would you convince the political elites? And Todorova, who wrote the foreword of the book, in the end says, there is a paradoxical tongue-in-cheek when the author inverts the usual explanation of acceptance of disparaging stereotypes and self-depreciation as self-colonization. What it shows instead is the imitation of the Western sense of other within the Western Balkan sense of self, maybe the Georgian too, is an active and politically calculated reproduction. It's perhaps for the best that politicians will not read this book, but it will be broadly appreciated by those interested in and caring about the Balkans. And I really think that given how Balkanization and these processes of otherness are deeply cultural, the change there will be a long-term one to get to then really meaningful policy implications. So at this stage, this is meant to have us reflect also at a very cultural level, and then thinking maybe about engaging reform-minded leaders first to see whether we could materialize the reflections that I provide in the book.
Thank you. Ali would like to add something?
Yes.
I think it's better for the recording.
Oh, got it. Okay, so I am a PhD student who's been required to read a lot of books, and I don't often read the foreword. This foreword is funny. Read the foreword.
Okay, thank you. Policy. Your heart is warmed by policy.
Thank you, Clemens, and a fantastic panel. The Balkans is such a fascinating area, and I take Gazim's point about the Balkanization resulting from the collapse of an empire. So when I think about it, Balkans show both the fragmentation, the ethnic differences, the conflict, and it also evocates a memory of a time when they were part of the Yugoslavia, where there was some level of coexistence, some level of tolerance, probably not the most democratic one, but there was some kind of a social order happening. And I'm wondering, what would it take to restore this, particularly and more specifically about the absence of any truth and reconciliation, any kind of a transitional justice process, which means that whichever conflict has happened in the 90s is still very much alive, it's still very much latent. So we'll be 30 years into the Dayton peace agreements next year. So that's a real good question.
Thank you. How to bring Tito back?
So before Brexit, I think the Balkans were the one who actually sort of knew that EU will at some point start disintegrating. Not entirely, but so I remember sort of Yugoslav scholars or former Yugoslav sort of, from Serbia, and I was saying like, what's the point of joining the EU, because we know that they're going to collapse one day. So this historical Balkanized memory of knowing that, they've been part of multiple empires in the past and they don't last, really has made them skeptical of new alliances like EU and NATO. So that historical awareness is there, and actually it has foregrounded as well as served as a background knowledge for the Balkans to be sort of pessimistic about the promises of these processes. So in terms of sort of restoring some sort of, commonality, sort of evidence has shown that transitional justice processes such as war crime trials, memorialization, they have actually had counter effect. They have re-Balkanized the Balkans in a negative sense. They haven't closed the historical legacies, but they have really reactualized them in a new form. So there's a disconnect between peace building and transitional justice. If you want peace building, you need forgetting, you need forgiving and moving on, which are not easy. So, but then half of the other side of the coin is dealing with the past. And dealing with the past means very much getting stuck into these sort of, nitty-gritty details of revenge and who was right, who was wrong, justices, and so on and so forth. And materialization or commemorization are the best example of that, sort of how division is reproduced. So certainly it requires some ethical re-engineering, which is not really easy, to overcome and find some commonality of the past. And the platform of joining the EU and NATO were thought and ought to be as a forward-looking forms of overcoming. But their EU is not really willing to kind of, give them a chance to try something new. So they're caught in that sort of duality.
I just would like to add, and I really appreciate the question, Andres, here, that the Yugoslav project has come up throughout these different Western countries that I went to study, and especially when Scandinavian professors would join, they would speak of really Yugoslavia in sort of positive fashion. And as an Albanian from North Macedonia, and I think I'd speak also a little bit to Gazim here as an Albanian from Kosovo, or as a Kosovar, take it as you will, Gazim. Irish too, sorry. I should have started with that. That was triggering to hear, right? So I'd hear professors perpetually referring to Yugoslavia as this rainbows and unicorn period in our history. And I was born in 91, where Yugoslavia dissolved. And that for many Albanians was a very celebratory moment. So to hear others referring to this, oh, why don't we just go back to Yugoslavia? Was a bit of a romanticization, yes. That I think that, of course, at maybe sort of a superficial level, there was not direct violence as you'd see during the Yugoslav wars, but structurally, this kind of divisions nevertheless existed. So what I'm hoping is that not that necessarily we reproduce this sort of cessation of hostilities, but that we perhaps go beyond that. And the process to do it, again, I think will be long. One of the things I mentioned in the presentation, and I continue to believe in, is that it's going to have to be both an academic and a political sustained engagement and shifting the lens. So if we continue to engage with this region through the end of ethnic hate, through the lens of ethnic hatred, we will be reproducing the same. I think something like intersectionality would help us all maybe go beyond what we've seen until now.
Good. Okay. We have 11 minutes left. I know, Duda. And 2 questions. We take the 2 questions together, one after the other.
So taking it from a slightly different, you've talked about political, you've talked about sort of ethnic backgrounds and all this sort of complexity. I ended up engaging in this and not even knowing. I was working a large CPG company based out of the South Europe cluster, which included France. And my boss, a really feisty Greek, was fighting for the Balkans, not because he cared about everything you talked about, but because Romania was an up-and-coming and emerging source of 20 million people who would buy consumer products. He actually rebranded, and I don't know if it's patronizing or helpful, but we called it Southeast Europe. And it was a way of sort of like making it a little more palatable to Switzerland, who was sort of running the purse strings. And so to your point, Yasmin, like, have you seen that Romania becomes a cooler place to invest now that they all had to come out of the Russian market, out of, protest of Ukraine, but also the UK had been a fuel for so long for those markets and really flattened out. So as all of those business leaders seek to, put the growth back into their P&Ls, is that a way to help accelerate some of the EU pieces you're talking about?
Thank you. Hold your thoughts on feisty Greeks and Southeast Europe. Josefina will go next.
Thank you so much, Clemens, and thank you so much, Liridona, Gazim, and Carly, for this wonderful panel. Congratulations on your book. I think that the amount of interest that has been generated here should also be an invitation for us at the Keough School to think about how to anchor these topics. They are obviously multidisciplinary, but they also bring about a wonderful institutional collaboration. So I take that also as an invitation from this panel. And I just wanted to mention this, what Andres was asking, and because I think that the idea that that after the 1995 Dayton Peace Accord, what we have is a situation of relative peace in the former Balkan, in the former Yugoslavia, is complicated when we look at the way or the level or the intensity of the distance between the different entities, and how much, at least in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the very reification of those identities is what is keeping the stability in place. I wouldn't say necessarily the peace. So I wanted to, kind of like ask you and invite you to help us reflect further, or what is it that we're looking at when we're about to celebrate the 30 years of the Dayton Agreement? Our students here wrote a wonderful paper proposing a truth commission for Bosnia and Herzegovina that links together these questions of transitional justice and peace building. So I also invite you to read that paper from our own very MGA students. Thank you.
Thank you, Josefina. So please, now you can answer.
Yeah, so let me just, I mean, you're right. So the label of Southeast Europe, it's meant to kind of be more neutral, geographically accurate, and remove the historical stigmatization. And that was certainly the case for Greece, who really don't want to be a part of the Balkans. Romania and Bulgaria, when they joined the EU and NATO, they were so happy because they shifted the blame or the bad label to former Yugoslav republics. And that's why the label of Western Balkans was invented, to reflect that sort of narrow part. And then after Croatia joined the EU, they said, well, no, there's no Western Balkans. We are not part of Balkans anymore. So again, it just speaks of the Balkans has not been by the way, it's a geographical sort of, originally it was geographical reference, originating from Romanian sort of, part, but it has then been labeled as something, negative, harmful, fragmental. So certainly for business, politics, state identity, everyone wants to avoid and escape that. And one of the incentives to join the EU and NATO has been to escape Balkanization. And that's a really powerful one, because state labels stick with states. I mean, Turkey had to change the name recently because they just really didn't like being called Turkey. So they really wanted to go back to something that they wanted to regard themselves as who they are. India is in process of discussing changing the name, sort of, to go back to their own way of labeling the state. So there's something powerful in terms of self-identification and escaping the labels that historically really were harmful. And then for the Bosnia question, maybe I'll respond after Liridona, the space.
Yeah, I am actually going to get to the question. I just wanted to show the two tables because one of the references is Southeast Europe, right? And so you'll see in the book the use of brackets all the time. And it's really to capture the historicity of these terms and how they've really changed through time. But here are also the layers of otherness that they've uncovered, the temporal and the spatial dimensions of those, and the ethicality. And so I think regardless of the reference, the liminal part has remained, the liminal reference of nearly there, but never quite, that has remained. But I want to go back to Josefina's question and just really publicly acknowledge the excellence of your students that that are also here, and that if time permits, they'd be also the right authorities to speak on their paper. I met with them when they were building the paper on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Bosnia, and one of the first things I said was good luck, right? Because of course I think the conditions are not ripe, but there are ways that we can start thinking about it. And one of those was that reflexive approach that I suggested. And I think that were we to organize an event for the 30th anniversary, it will require a lot of self-reflection also from the West. I mean, just the name Dayton Accords, Bosnia and Herzegovina, implies an externalization here. And it was really a political achievement rather than a reflection of whatever was reached on the ground, an achievement for the West and an exemplification of the Western unity that was reached during the Accords. So I think we'll need me to first start with unpacking that and then talk more about agency rather than conditionality if we want these processes to be also local. But I'll talk more to the students and see what they came up with.
Thank you.
Carly.
Give it to Carly. Guess you want to respond to, because even and then we give the last word to Liridona.
I'm gonna take the Dayton Accords question, and as particularly the portion of your question that talked about, what do we do with the idea that sort of reinforcing these ethnic identities is in some way what keeps the peace? My question is peace for who, right? Because if you're one of the constituent people, right, and you are representative in the office of the presidency, then this may look something like a functioning system of representation, right? But if you're one of a non-trivial portion of the Jews or Roma in these contexts, you're not represented or engaged in the process hardly at all. So I do think it's important that we continually ask the questions like, what is peace and for whom?
Thank you.
Yeah, so, okay, so I've also engaged with Bosnia in various projects, and I have a book coming next year on counterpeace with Oliver Richmond and Sandra Pagoda, and we argue that actually the very essential efforts to build peace are producing negative effects that we call counterpeace. So there's something inherent with the peace building efforts that is really producing bad results. And that is forging a policy that is not really authentic and wanted by all groups in conflict. So if you go back to the Bosnian case, I think the problem is the norm of trying to keep Bosnia together as a state is not compatible with Bosnian Serbs who really want to either join the Serbia or have their own state. So by banning secessionism and state separation, we're trying to force them to stay together in a state, so reinforce the norm of territorial integrity, sovereignty, and help EU and others not have a spillover effect. We're kind of in this dynamic that we're 30 years later. So it is something that we have to, open up the conversation about secessionism and self-determination. I know no one wants to talk about that because we have othered Dodik and sort of them, and we've put them in a label of with Russia and sort of, and so there is some truth to the fact that they really don't want to be together in a state. So that's why we have so many states in the world, because they didn't want to be together. That's why empires collapse.
That's why we built the Keough School, because the institutes would love to be together.
Yeah, so exactly. So there's something that we need to change the fundamental norms of international system to make them more compatible with the reality on the ground. Unless we merge these two realities of legal normative aspirations and the reality on the ground, we will not be able to have peace.
Thank you.
So it's that sort of synchronization needing to happen.
So Liridona, you have 2 last minutes to give us something for our journey as we continue.
2 last seconds. Yes, just again, really thank you to everyone for showing up, to the institutes for supporting the work, to your questions, really, that I've written down, and that will be a source for further reflection. Really enjoyed this, to Gazim, to Carly, to Clemens too, for your interventions. And yeah, I hope we all leave this room with, this might sound strange, but with more questions rather than answers. And I'd like to hear all of them whenever we get the chance to meet around the halls here. So thank you.
Thank you, Liridona. Congratulations, and a round of applause for our panel. If the moderator wasn't so fascist with the time, I would have liked to ask a question about area studies. It came up a few times, and you said there's so much more than area studies in what you did. And I would be curious is there a point of area studies to go beyond it? Anyway, thank you to our sister institutes, the Kroc and the Keough-Naughton. Thank you, Keith, and all those who made this event possible. Enjoy the rest of your stay here in Notre Dame, Gizim. Enjoy the rest of your lives, everybody, and happy Halloween.